All right, this is your assignment guide of sorts for week 3, and also a look back at week 2 and a little feedback on your post from week 2. First, about week 3. Remember, the case study for week 3 is found under content module number 1 this week, and it's the March 6th Michigan tornado that did not have a severe thunderstorm watch. It didn't have a tornado watch. In fact, it didn't even have a tornado warning until after the tornado started to happen, and by then it had already caused one fatality. So you'll see that in the content regarding this case study. But this is a really fascinating case study. You look at it from the angle of how come there weren't warnings issued? How come there weren't watches issued? How come the Storm Prediction Center kind of tamped down the risk outlook? In other words, they didn't have a exceedingly high risk for tornadoes or strong tornadoes over that part of southwest Michigan for the March 6th episode, and it was simply because it was an isolated supercell storm, very difficult to predict. So there's a lot of complexities in the forecast that came into play there for that storm. I shared a lot of content in terms of some look back from different perspectives from a couple of researchers on the storm and what went wrong with the forecast. And again, I think it's a fascinating case study, and that's why for this week we're talking about severe storms, tornadoes, flash flooding, the severe weather kind of theme this week, that I thought this would be an appropriate one to use this week. So again, reminder, your assignment for this week that you submit for the week 3 assignment will be the case study from week 3, and it's the March 6th tornado in southwest Michigan. Now, that said, remember you can always submit the post via the assignment folder. That said, I want to now take a minute to look back on your post that you submitted for week 2, okay? And this is that general feedback I want you to think about as you're developing your post that you're going to send me for week 3 for the case study for the March 6th tornado. Looking back on week 2, we dealt with the January 24th, 25th snowstorm, obviously, snow and sleet storm. Just a few comments on feedback, and I shared some of these thoughts with you in your specific feedback as well. And by the way, if you're looking for the feedback to your post and you're having trouble finding it, it's always found under the rubric because I'm grading these under the rubric. So if you go to your post, what you sent me, there should be a little view rubric on the side there. Click on the rubric and it will give you the feedback that I've included, okay? Basically, hopefully you can find that feedback. If you can't find it, you're having trouble with that, email me and I'll try to, help direct you to where you can find that. That said, the general feedback goes in this direction. Most of you, and not all of you, thought that communications was pretty effective for that storm. Most of you covered all the answers to those 5 questions I put into the first assignment video, which was posted when you first started taking this class. But I'm looking for a little more, okay? And I want you to just kind of take it the extra step now. And number 1, I want you to answer the questions in terms of specifically for this case study. Some of you kind of talk generalities and things like that, which is fine. But if you're going to do that, kind of frame it around this case study, give it an example or two from this case study to support your theme that you're sharing with me in your post. Second point is, as far as the communications effectiveness, well, first let me go to the forecaster challenges, okay, which goes to that first question. The challenges actually all circle back to the fact that this was another very high impact weather event, okay? The impacts to this could be very far reaching. Power outages, people without power for days with cold weather following, travel impacts, all of that. Heavy snow. It was highly promoted that this was via social media and other sources that this was going to be potentially a almost historic type snowfall. And the challenge of the forecast for the forecasters was how to frame this forecast and imply that there's also some uncertainty. And in my view, unfortunately, there wasn't enough uncertainty communicated that people saw. In other words, the National Weather Service in their YouTube briefings, which were great, expressed the uncertainty, but honestly, how many people actually go and see those YouTube briefings? If you know, you have to be directed to find those, basically. Most people get their weather information via social media or their weather app or TV meteorologists, okay? So the fact that the Weather Service did a great kind of broad brush impact-based discussion and briefing on how the storm could affect us with different outcomes and such, most people saw the worst case scenarios put out on social media. And honestly, we are drawn as humans to the worst case scenarios. Our attention tends to be drawn to what's the worst that can happen. Oh my goodness, okay? So in that respect, the communications from the senders need to convey all the possible outcomes and the degree of uncertainty in the forecast. And I think there was some degree of failure in that respect with this case study, because I think most people did expect lots of snow. They expected lots of freezing rain because their power outages, honestly, were one of the big features of this forecast. People were prepared for outages. They, stocked up on things and, charged their batteries and all that kind of stuff, which is great. Be prepared. However, because we didn't have the freezing rain, we didn't have the ice build up on power lines and tree limbs, we had sleet instead. And therefore, that minute difference in the forecast temperature aloft, as I showed you in one of the videos for that case study, I talked about the profiles of the temperatures of the atmosphere. That small difference made a huge difference in the fact that we didn't have hardly any power outages to speak of, at least here in the Richmond area. All right, there were out toward Tennessee, that area where there was more of the freezing rain. So I think people were prepared for the freezing rain. When it didn't happen, they say, "What happened?" We're, no problems. People were generally happy about that, right? But also people were expecting more than the 3 or 4 inches of snow that we had. And that's all we had. We had sleet on top of it, which made it like a thick concrete that didn't melt for 2 weeks over most of the area. And that caused the travel issues. So I think the issues and the communications were that people were expecting more snow. They were expecting freezing rain with power outages. People were also generally happy that we didn't have the power outages, but they were kind of wondering, why didn't we have more snow out of this one? In fact, that was always one of the possibilities. There might not be as much snow. But that goes to the communications. Enough uncertainty was not put out there, okay, by all sources. And remember, I defined this at the beginning of the class. Media does not only include TV broadcasters, it includes social media sites, it includes online weather people, it includes your phone apps, it includes any source of communication of weather information. So even though the Weather Service and other meteorologists may have expressed all of the uncertainty, there was so much communication of worst case. I think that's what people were drawn to emotionally and expected in terms of snow. Now, that said, it was a significant storm. It had broad impact, so I think a lot of people just kind of look past the fact that it didn't happen exactly as expected and they realize this is still a very impactful storm because we are dealing with it for 2 weeks after the fact. But when you look over the forecast in general, as a whole, I think there was a little bit of a drop in the communications effectiveness there. And it's something that, as a weather forecaster, we look at because we think, why didn't we express more of the fact that there could have been more sleet than freezing rain? Why did we emphasize there could be so much snow when in reality we kind of saw that it might not turn out that way, even a day before? And so forecasters, as senders, will kind of reevaluate how they look at the models and stuff for the next similar storm situation. And so that's how that social science aspect is forward-looking. How do I forecast the next storm? What do I look at differently? And and then how do I communicate it differently? And then from a response factor, people responded definitely, no question about it. People responded, expected a bad storm, and that was great. But the fact that they were prepared for maybe different scenarios, would that affect how they respond for a similar storm in the future? All right. A question I kind of throw out there hypothetically, and something you might address in a post too. And then that circles back to respond. How do they respond then? If they lose trust, is their response, affected, and all of that? And it all circles back. So I guess my point overall is when you look at this, when you're posting, be specific to the case study, of course. Use examples specifically to the case study, but also look at the broad picture of the communications, of the forecast complexities, of the response, and how you can be forward-looking, all right? Look forward to how this case study could affect the social science aspects in terms of the senders and how it's communicated and the receivers for a future similar storm situation. So most of you didn't go there, okay? And I understand that it wasn't addressed as one of these specific questions initially, but I do want you, and I have expressed that in my feedback individually though, and I do want you to kind of go there, be more forward-looking in terms of how this could impact future social science aspects with similar storms, and also connect all of them. How does this all kind of one affect the other, that sort of thing.